The storm wasn't just in the skies. It tore through Mia's heart, leaving her breathless. Her hands trembled as she stared at the message on Liam's phone. "I never loved you." The words burned into her soul, an unbearable truth she couldn't ignore. Liam stood across from her, his eyes filled with regret but no apology. She wanted to scream, to slap him, but the world felt like it was crashing down in slow motion. She thought of the years they had shared, every promise they had made, and the future she had built in her mind. It was all a lie. Her heart broke, not because of what he had done but because of the love she still felt for him. She took a step back, the rain now drenching her, mirroring the tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, and turned away, leaving behind everything she once thought was true. Mia's world was collapsing, but her grandmother's voice was the only thing that brought clarity. Eleanor had weathered her own storms and found peace. She took Mia's hands in hers, her eyes kind yet firm. "You must heal, Mia," Eleanor said softly. "The storm may rage outside, but inside, you must find calm. Don't let the winds break you." Mia's heart ached as she thought of the storm within her. How could she heal? Could she ever let go of the hurt? But looking at her grandmother, Mia saw a woman who had loved and lost, yet still stood strong. Eleanor's wisdom was the balm Mia needed, but accepting it was a struggle. Mia nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Eleanor smiled gently. "You don't need to know, you just need to begin." Mia began her journey to healing, but the road was anything but straight. She struggled to breathe without the weight of her past pressing on her chest. She tried to lose herself in nature, the quiet lake near her cabin, but every time the wind blew through the trees, she heard Liam's voice. His betrayal echoed in the silence, and she found it impossible to escape. Every step forward felt like a step backward. She'd been broken once, but now she feared she would never be whole again. And yet, in the stillness of the forest, she sensed something new, an ember of strength that had lain dormant, waiting to be awakened. One morning, Mia uncovered an old letter hidden beneath a stack of papers in the attic. It was from her father, written years ago. The letter revealed that he too had betrayed her mother, a revelation that shattered Mia's understanding of love. How could she have known? How could she have trusted anything? The revelation cut deep, for not only had Liam betrayed her, but now she saw that the love she had been taught to believe in was broken long before she even met him. Mia crumpled the letter in her hands, the pain overwhelming. She had to face this new truth. Her past was full of hidden wounds, and healing would require far more than just moving on from Liam. Mia stood at the edge of the lake, her thoughts a maelstrom. The storm was finally passing, but the emotional winds within her refused to calm. The pain of betrayal, now compounded by her father's secret, left her feeling as though she was drowning. But standing there, looking at the lake's still surface, Mia realized something crucial. She couldn't continue to be defined by others' mistakes. She had to break free. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes and let the stillness of the moment settle around her. It was time to heal, even if it meant starting from scratch. Mia's new life in the secluded cabin by the lake was supposed to be her refuge, but the silence only intensified the ache inside her. Every morning, the same sadness lingered like a fog. She tried to distract herself, long walks, reading, cooking, but every activity felt hollow. At times, the stillness was overwhelming. The lake stretched before her, its surface mirroring the emptiness she felt inside. The days passed, but the ache of betrayal still clung to her soul, each thought of Liam twisting the knife deeper. Even in the solitude, the storm inside her hadn't calmed. But then, something shifted. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the lake one afternoon. Her eyes, though tired, were no longer empty. For the first time, she saw strength there. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a journey, and she had taken the first step. Mia spent more time in nature, trying to reconnect with herself. One afternoon, while walking through the forest near the cabin, she stumbled upon a small clearing. The sunlight broke through the canopy, bathing the scene in golden warmth. For a moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift, replaced by a fleeting sense of peace. She knelt by a bed of wildflowers, inhaling their sweet scent. It was then that she realized she'd been searching for peace in all the wrong places. It wasn't the cabin nor the isolation that would heal her. It was within her. The love and betrayal she had suffered were a part of her story, but they didn't define her. As she stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, Mia understood. Healing wasn't about escaping the past, it was about accepting it and finding the strength to move forward. Weeks passed, and Mia began to settle into a new routine. The quiet of the cabin was no longer suffocating, but became a space where she could breathe and slowly rebuild. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far she'd come. The pain wasn't gone, far from it, but it had dulled, and she could finally see the pieces of herself that had been lost in the chaos of the past. She thought about the woman she had been with Liam, the person who had been so desperate for love that she had overlooked her own worth. The woman sitting on the porch now was different, stronger, more whole. The journey had just begun, but Mia no longer felt afraid of it. She could feel the first inklings of self-love creeping in, and it was a feeling she wasn't willing to lose. Mia had been avoiding the one person who could have helped her move forward, her best friend, Sarah. The thought of opening up to anyone, especially Sarah, felt like an admission of weakness. But after weeks of isolation, Mia finally picked up the phone. Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice filled with surprise but also warmth. "Mia, I'm so glad you called," she said. The floodgates opened then. Mia spoke of the betrayal, the pain, and the loneliness that had been her constant companions. Sarah listened without interruption, offering only comfort. "You don't have to do this alone," Sarah said softly. The weight of those words settled on Mia like a blanket, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to lean on someone else. It was a small step, but it was a step toward healing. Mia spent the next few days reflecting on her conversation with Sarah. She realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. She wasn't defined by her past or the betrayal. She was more than the sum of her scars. As the days turned into weeks, Mia began to understand that healing wasn't just about time. It was about self-compassion and forgiveness. She wasn't ready to forgive Liam, not yet. But she was starting to forgive herself. The lake, once a mirror of her pain, had become a place of reflection and clarity. Mia could finally see herself not as a victim, but as a woman who had the strength to rise again. And with that realization, a new chapter began. Mia stood at the edge of the small town's cafe, watching the world around her. It had been months since she'd fled the storm of her past, and though the pain had softened, it still lingered. Today was different, though. Today she was meeting someone new. Someone who didn't know her as the woman who had been betrayed. Her heart raced, the familiar rush of vulnerability creeping in. She had spent so long hiding from the world, burying her fears in solitude. But now, standing in this cafe, she felt something stir within her. Was she ready to open herself up again? Was she ready to risk it all? She couldn't answer those questions yet, but there was something about this moment, something about this stranger, that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in a long time. It wasn't about love, not yet. It was about possibility. The door opened, and in walked a stranger. His presence filled the room, and for a brief moment, Mia felt her breath catch. His name was Lucas, and his smile was easy, unguarded. There was something about him, a kind of warmth that made her feel at ease. As they exchanged pleasantries, Mia found herself laughing. It felt good, almost foreign. She hadn't realized how much she had missed simple human connection. For a while, the pain of the past melted away, replaced by the gentle rhythm of a conversation. She didn't need to know everything about him, and he didn't need to know everything about her. It was enough to simply be in this moment. But even as she felt the walls begin to crumble, a part of her hesitated. Could she trust again? Was she ready to love? The questions lingered, but for now, she let them go. As the evening wore on, Mia realized just how much she had missed feeling seen, truly seen, by someone. Lucas listened without judgment, laughed without hesitation, and offered kindness without expectation. The ease of their conversation was like a balm to her weary soul. But even as she felt herself open up, a nagging doubt tugged at her. She couldn't escape her fear of getting too close, of giving too much of herself away. Her heart had been shattered once, and the cracks still remain. But tonight, she found herself standing on the edge of something new. The possibility of love wasn't as terrifying as it once had been. Maybe it was time to start healing, to take that first step toward a new chapter. She didn't know if Lucas would be a part of that future, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mia and Lucas spent time together, slowly peeling back the layers of their lives. They shared stories of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. With every conversation, Mia felt herself growing stronger. She was no longer the woman lost in grief. She was becoming someone new, someone capable of embracing the world again. But the closer she grew to Lucas, the more her past threatened to creep back in. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her cabin, Mia's thoughts turned dark. What if this was just another illusion? What if love was a lie she'd told herself in an attempt to heal? Lucas noticed her shift in mood, and gently placed his hand on hers, his touch grounding her. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said softly. "Just take it one day at a time." And for the first time in a long while, Mia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something to fear. Mia woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her window, the sun rising over the lake. She felt different, lighter. The heaviness that had once consumed her was beginning to lift. In the months since meeting Lucas, Mia had learned to open herself up again, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but she was no longer afraid of the future. She had learned to embrace it, to accept the possibility of love without fearing the pain that came with it. Today, she wasn't just a woman who had been broken. She was a woman who had survived, who had found strength in her vulnerability. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face whatever came next with an open heart. Mia had started to believe that she was finally moving forward. The past was behind her, and she was building a new future. One that didn't revolve around her past mistakes. But life had other plans. One evening, as she sat on the porch with Lucas, the air thick with the scent of rain, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Liam. The words, so simple and cold, shook her to her core. "I need to see you." Mia's heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard from him in months. She hadn't wanted to. But now, here it was, an invitation that felt like a trap. Lucas noticed the change in her demeanor, the sudden stillness in her posture. He reached for her hand, his touch grounding. "You don't have to answer it," he said softly. But Mia knew she had to. The past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you ran. Mia sat in her car, parked outside the small cafe where she had agreed to meet Liam. Her heart raced as memories of their time together flooded her mind. The laughter, the love, the dreams they had shared. How could everything be so different now? She hadn't wanted this meeting. Not now. Not after everything she'd been through. But deep down she knew this was inevitable. She had to confront the man who had once been her whole world, face the betrayal head on. As she stepped out of the car, the rain continued to fall, each drop tapping against the ground like a reminder of the tears she had shed. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, a mix of anger and fear building inside her. She was ready to face the past, but was she strong enough to let it go? Liam was already there when Mia walked in. He sat in the far corner, his back straight, eyes scanning the room, as if waiting for her to appear. When their gazes met, a jolt ran through her. He hadn't changed. He still had that same intensity, that same ability to make her feel both safe and unsettled. "Mia," he said softly, standing up as she approached. His voice was low, a mixture of regret and something else she couldn't quite place. They exchanged awkward pleasantries, both of them tiptoeing around the words that really mattered. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "I never meant to hurt you. I was lost." Mia listened, her heart heavy with everything she wanted to say but couldn't. She had come to this meeting to confront him, but now, all she felt was exhaustion. "I don't need your apologies," Mia replied, her voice steady, though her insides churned. "I need to let go of you." As Mia left the cafe, the weight of the past seemed to settle back into her chest. She had confronted Liam, but she wasn't sure if it had helped or hurt. The cold night air felt heavy as she walked toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. She hadn't expected closure, but maybe she had hoped for something, an apology, an acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused her. But there was nothing. And now, all she had was this raw emptiness. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Liam, it was Lucas. She paused, staring at the screen. "Are you okay?" the message read. She didn't reply immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. How could she explain the storm inside her? Instead, she sat in her car, her hands gripping the wheel, the tears that had threatened to fall finally making their way down her cheeks. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment she realized that healing wasn't a straight line. But somehow, she knew she'd find her way through it. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Mia tried to immerse herself in work, in her routine, but everything felt off-kilter. She kept replaying the conversation with Liam, dissecting every word, every glance. But in the quiet moments, when she allowed herself to feel, she realized something important. She had already let go of him. She had been holding onto the past because she thought she needed closure. But what she really needed was to forgive herself. She had allowed herself to be defined by someone else's mistakes for too long. Mia wasn't that woman anymore. The healing wasn't easy, but she was finally starting to see it for what it was. A process, not a destination. And in that moment, as she sat in her cabin by the lake, the storm outside finally began to quiet. She had weathered the worst of it, and she was stronger for it. Mia awoke to the soft sound of birds chirping outside her cabin. The sun had just risen, casting a warm, golden hue across the lake. It had been weeks since her last confrontation with Liam, but the wounds were still raw. She had convinced herself that she was fine, that she had moved on. But deep down, she knew she hadn't fully dealt with the pain. As she gazed out the window, a familiar figure walked up the path to her cabin. It was Lucas, his face calm but his eyes searching. "I think we need to talk," he said gently. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had come to care for him deeply. But this conversation felt inevitable. The weight of what she had been carrying inside now hung between them. She couldn't run from it anymore. The past was still there, lingering in the shadows, and it was time to face it, not just for her, but for them. They sat down in the small living room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Lucas took a deep breath. "Mia, I know you've been carrying something inside. It's been weighing on you, and I need to know what it is." Mia's throat tightened as she looked at him. The vulnerability she had once kept hidden now seemed impossible to ignore. She had built walls around her heart, convinced that no one would ever understand. But with Lucas something felt different. "It's not just about the past," Mia began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's about me. I don't know who I am without the pain, without the betrayal. I've been holding on to it because it feels safer. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to let it go." The tears she had kept at bay for so long finally fell, one by one. She wasn't sure if she was ready to heal, but she knew that this moment, with Lucas by her side, was the first step. For hours, Mia and Lucas talked. They spoke of past pain, broken trust, and the pieces of themselves they had each lost along the way. Lucas listened without judgment, his presence a steady anchor. When the conversation turned to the future, Mia felt a flicker of hope stir within her. Maybe there was something waiting for her on the other side of this storm. But as the day wore on, a realization began to sink in. Mia couldn't keep looking back. She had spent so much time holding on to memories, to the woman she used to be, that she had forgotten to live in the present. "I need to stop running," Mia said softly, her voice steady. "I need to forgive him. I need to forgive myself." The decision hung in the air, its weight both freeing and terrifying. But Mia knew, deep down, that it was the only way forward. Mia spent the next few days reflecting on her decision. The weight of forgiveness was a strange thing. It didn't come easily, but it was liberating. She had always thought that letting go meant forgetting, but she realized that wasn't true. Letting go meant accepting what had happened and choosing to move forward. She spent the afternoon walking through the forest near her cabin, the trees a quiet witness to her inner transformation. As she walked, she thought of Liam, not with anger, but with a sense of closure. He was no longer a part of her story. And that was okay. She could now write her own narrative. When she returned to the cabin, Lucas was waiting for her, his expression soft but filled with understanding. "You've made a big decision," he said, his voice full of quiet admiration. Mia smiled, the weight in her chest lighter than it had been in months. "I'm ready," she whispered. Mia and Lucas sat together by the lake, the world around them calm and still. The water shimmered beneath the setting sun, reflecting the orange and pink hues of the sky. It was a perfect moment, one that Mia would always remember. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But I know I'm ready to face it. With you or on my own, I don't want to keep running anymore." Lucas reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady. "You don't have to do this alone, Mia. I'm here." Mia smiled, her heart full for the first time in a long while. She had faced the storms, and now she was ready to embrace the calm. Whatever the future brought, she knew she was stronger than before. Mia had spent the last few months rediscovering herself, slowly piecing together the fragments of who she had been before the storm had torn her apart. But now, as she stood in front of the decision she had been dreading, everything seemed uncertain again. She had been invited to a family gathering, a moment that would force her to confront the people who had been part of her life before the betrayal. The invitation felt like a heavy weight, an anchor that pulled her back to a time she had worked so hard to leave behind. She could ignore it, avoid the confrontation, but she knew that if she didn't go, she would forever be running from her past. "Do you think I should go?" Mia asked Lucas, her voice uncertain. Lucas looked at her thoughtfully. "You can't move forward without facing it," he replied quietly, his eyes full of understanding. Mia nodded, knowing he was right. It was time to face the things she had been avoiding. The day of the gathering arrived, and Mia found herself standing in front of the house she once called home. The front door loomed in front of her like an unmovable barrier. Memories of laughter, love, and warmth came rushing back, but so did the anger, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. The feeling of being torn between two worlds was overwhelming. She had come this far, rebuilt herself from the ground up, but now, standing here, the fear of everything falling apart crept back in. Would her family understand? Would they see the change in her, or would they still view her as the woman who had been shattered? As she reached for the doorbell, her heart pounded in her chest. She hesitated, unsure of what would happen next, but then the door swung open, and there they were, her family, her past, her ghosts. Mia stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The familiar smell of her mother's cooking filled the air, and the sound of laughter and conversation surrounded her. It was as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. She felt like an outsider in her own life, uncertain of where she belonged. Her mother greeted her with open arms, but there was something in her eyes that Mia couldn't quite place. "I'm so glad you came," her mother said, her voice warm at laced with an unspoken question. Mia forced a smile, but the weight of the unspoken words between them hung heavy in the air. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but now she wasn't sure how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. As they sat at the dinner table, Mia tried to focus on the conversation around her, but every word felt distant. She was there, physically, but emotionally, she felt miles away. After dinner, Mia found herself alone in the backyard, looking out at the stars. The cool evening air brushed against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. She hadn't expected this to be easy, but she hadn't anticipated how much it would hurt. Her family, once a source of comfort, now felt like strangers. She had spent so much time trying to heal, but she hadn't realized how much of herself she had left behind. As she stared up at the stars, she thought about her journey, the pain, the loss, the rebuilding. And then she thought about Lucas. He had been there for her in ways no one else had. But now here she was standing alone, faced with the pieces of her past she couldn't ignore. As her thoughts drifted, her mother stepped out onto the porch, her footsteps quiet but steady. "Mia," she said softly, "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you've become." For the first time in years, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to the people she loved without losing herself in the process. Mia returned to the cabin that evening, her mind racing with everything that had happened. The dinner had been bittersweet, filled with both moments of connection and lingering tension. Her family had accepted her return, but she knew it would take time to rebuild the trust they had lost. Lucas was waiting for her at the cabin, his face soft with concern. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mia let out a long sigh. "It was hard," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means to heal. Not just from what happened, but from everything." Lucas nodded, his hand reaching out to her. As she took it, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to rebuild not just her life, but the relationships that mattered most. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Mia felt certain that she could face it. The morning was quiet, almost too quiet, as Mia stood at the threshold of a new beginning. She had spent so many years letting the past define her, but now everything felt different. She had faced her family, made peace with her past, and embraced the possibility of love again. Today, however, was about taking the final step, the step where she no longer looked behind her but stepped fully into her future. As she stood outside the cabin, Lucas walked up beside her, his presence a calming force. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that reflected the growth both of them had gone through. "You're ready," he said softly. Mia turned to face him, her heart full. "I think I always was," she replied, her voice steady. With that simple exchange, Mia knew that the journey ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time, she felt like she was truly in control of her own story. As Mia and Lucas walked through the nearby woods, the quiet beauty of the forest mirrored the transformation Mia had undergone. The trees, tall and wise, stood as a reminder of the years she had spent hiding, waiting for the right moment. But now, she knew that the right moment had always been within her reach. The forest was full of life, just like her spirit, which had been reborn through every trial. "Sometimes I think the hardest part of healing is letting go," Mia said, her voice thoughtful as she glanced at Lucas. He nodded. "But letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means making peace." His words struck her deeply, and for the first time in her life, Mia felt that peace settle in her chest. She was no longer at war with herself. She had come to terms with who she was and where she had been. Mia's life had always been shaped by the people she loved, the relationships that defined her sense of self. But now, for the first time, she understood that her story was hers to tell. The moment she stopped letting others define her, the moment she took full responsibility for her own happiness, everything changed. As she sat by the lake later that afternoon, the water reflecting the sky above, she felt a deep connection to the earth beneath her feet. This was her foundation now, and it was solid. "I don't need anyone to save me," Mia said quietly to herself, the words carrying more weight than she had ever realized. "I am enough, just as I am." It was a simple truth, but it was the one that had eluded her for so long. Now, as the sun began to set, she felt the final remnants of her past fade away, replaced by a sense of peace she had never known. It was time for Mia to return to the life she had left behind, this time, not as a broken woman, but as someone who had learned to embrace the scars of her past. She was finally ready to move forward, to rebuild the relationships that had once seemed lost forever. As she sat at the dinner table with her family that evening, the same table where she had once felt the weight of betrayal and distance, there was no longer any tension. The air was light, filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Mia didn't have to prove herself anymore. She had done the hard work of healing, and now she simply existed in the moment, free from the fear of rejection. "You've changed," her mother said softly, her eyes filled with pride. Mia smiled, knowing it wasn't just her appearance that had changed, but her heart. Mia stood at the edge of the lake again, but this time, everything felt different. The sky was darkening, but instead of feeling fear, she felt a quiet sense of excitement. The future was still unknown, but she had the courage to face it. "Thank you for everything," Mia whispered to the wind, as if speaking to the universe itself. She had come a long way, through heartbreak, loss, and self-doubt. But now she knew that all of it had shaped her into the woman she was meant to be. As Lucas joined her by the water, his hand brushing against hers, Mia realized that it wasn't about finding the perfect life. It was about accepting the imperfections and embracing them. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, her voice full of promise. And as the last light of day faded into night, she stepped forward, ready for whatever came next.